The Flying Burrito Brothers were an American country rock band, best known for their influential 1969 debut album, The Gilded Palace of Sin. Although the group is perhaps best known for its connection to band founders Graham Parsons and Chris Hillman, the group underwent many personnel changes and has existed in various incarnations to the present day. Original lineup and members until 1972. The Flying Burrito Brothers were founded in 1968 on the west coast of the United States by former Byrds members Graham Parsons and Chris Hillman, as well as pianist and bassist Chris Etheridge and pedal steel guitarist Sneaky Pete Cleaneau. The group borrowed their name from an East Coast-based group of the same name who had been colleagues of Parsons' first band, the International Submarine Band, but had never recorded. Though Hillman and Roger McGuinn had fired Parsons from the Byrds in July 1968, Hillman and Parsons reconciled later that year after Hillman himself left the Byrds. Parsons had refused to join his Byrds bandmates for a tour of South Africa, citing his disapproval of that nation's apartheid regime. Hillman doubted the sincerity of Parsons' gesture, believing instead that the singer merely wanted to remain in England with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, whom he had recently befriended. The Flying Burrito Brothers recorded their debut album The Gilded Palace of Sin without a regular drummer, although Fast Eddie Ho and John Cornell both appear on the album. The album contains originals by Parsons and Hillman, and 2 covers by soul music writers Dan Penn and Chips Moman. After firing Cornell, the band needed a permanent drummer for touring purposes. They hired another ex-Byrd, Michael Clarke, who had recently been working with the Dillard and Clarke Expedition. Clarke remained the band's permanent drummer from 1969 to 1973. Although critically well received, The Gilded Palace of Sin did not sell well. The band had been invited to perform at the August 1969 Woodstock Festival but declined, instead electing to embark on a train tour of the United States which ultimately ended in disaster due to drug and alcohol use. Bassist Etheridge soon departed the group, with Hillman moving to bass as the band hired singer and guitarist Bernie Ledon. The band performed at the ill-fated Altamont Free Concert in December 1969, and, as documented in the film Gimme Shelter, the crowd remained largely peaceful throughout their performance. Parsons, the band's de facto leader and creative principal, was fired from the group in May 1970, shortly after the release of the Sophomore Burrito Deluxe album. According to Hillman, Parsons showed up for a band performance only minutes before they were to take the stage. Visibly intoxicated, he began singing songs which differed from what the rest of the band were performing. A furious Hillman fired him immediately after the show, to which Parsons responded, "You can't fire me, I'm Graham." This incident was merely the final straw, according to Hillman. Parsons' desire to hang out with the Rolling Stones rather than focus on his own band's career was also a significant factor, mirroring his 1968 dismissal from the Byrds. A third album featuring Parsons was recorded in 1970 but never released in its entirety. Several of the tracks from these sessions eventually saw the light of day in 1976 on the album Sleepless Nights. These tracks were intended for a traditional country album and featured country standards such as Green Grass of Home, and Tonight the Bottle Let Me Down. A version of the group without Parsons appeared in July 1970 on the Festival Express Tour of Canada, documented in the film of the same name. Graham was later replaced by Rick Roberts, with the new lineup releasing the self-titled album, The Flying Burrito Brothers, in 1971. Cleaneau then left to become a session musician, and Ledon departed to create the Eagles. Al Perkins and Kenny Wertz replaced them, and Roger Bush and Byron Berline participated as guests in live performances, with the band releasing a live album, Last of the Red Hot Burritos, in 1972. The original band dissolved after the last founding member, Chris Hillman, took Perkins with him to join Manassas. Berline, Bush and Wertz continued with their own band, Country Gazette. Roberts assembled a makeshift Flying Burrito Brothers group to fulfill contractual commitments for some 1973 European live shows, then initiated a solo career before forming Firefall with Michael Clarke. Later configurations, as Graham Parsons' influence and fame grew, so did interest in the Flying Burrito Brothers. This newfound popularity led to the release of Close Up the Honky Tonks in 1974, a double LP compilation of album tracks, B-sides, and outtakes. Soon after in 1975, Clino and Etheridge put together a new incarnation of the band. Parsons, for his part, had been asked in 1972 about the band continuing without him and remarked the ideal keep going on. "It's not like it's dead or anything. Whether I do it or anybody else does it, it's got to keep going." Floyd Gibb Gilbo, Joel Scott Hill, and Gene Parsons also joined the group, and the band released Flying Again that year. Etheridge was then replaced by Skip Battin for 1976's Airborne. The lineup continued to evolve for the rest of the 1970s, with the band even releasing an album under the name Sierra while continuing to play shows as the Flying Burrito Brothers. In 1980, they had a country hit with a version of Merle Haggard's White Line Fever from their Live in Tokyo live album of the previous year. The early 1980s were a period of commercial success for the band that coincided with the band being known simply as the Burrito Brothers. Headed by songwriter and guitarist John Belland, Gibb Gilbo, and initially Sneaky Pete, the Burrito Brothers scored well on the country charts. Skip Battin had remained with the band up until this point but left shortly before the release of 1981's Hearts on the Line. This marked the first significant commercial chart success the band ever had. In 1981 they received the Billboard Award for Best New Crossover Group from Pop to Country. The Burrito Brothers continued to work with the top session players in Nashville and Los Angeles, logging up an impressive list of hit singles for Curb Records. In the 80s they toured Europe and were featured at the Albi Nashville Festival in Albi, France, and performed with Emmylou Harris, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Tammy Wynette at London's Wembley Stadium. Also in the early 1980s, the Burrito Brothers were responsible for a campaign that finally saw their idol, Lefty Frizzle, inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. In 1982, Sneaky Pete, the sole original member, departed prior to the release of Sunset Sundown. In 1984, Belland and Gilbo retired the Burritos and afforded Sneaky Pete the chance to reform essentially the late 70s lineup with Skip Battin and Greg Harris that continued to tour and release live albums for the rest of the 80s. In 1991 a lineup consisting of Belland, Gilbo, Etheridge, Sneaky Pete, and Australian singer Brian Cadd began work on a new album, Eye of a Hurricane. The band went without a regular drummer and used session drummer Ron Tutt, who had previously played with Elvis Presley. The band soon parted ways with Etheridge for a third time and Cadd as well. Etheridge was replaced by Larry Patton and Gary Kibble was added as a full-time drummer. This lineup released California Jukebox in 1997. At this time Gibb Gilbo and Sneaky Pete stopped working with the group due to health concerns. Sneaky Pete was replaced by Wayne Bridge and the band released 1999's Sons of the Golden West, which, while receiving solid critical reviews, would prove to be the final album by the Flying Burrito Brothers as John Belland decided to end the band shortly after the turn of the millennium. Sneaky Pete then created a new Burrito project in 2002. This band was called Burrito Deluxe due to John Belland still having rights to the original name. This band featured Carlton Moody on lead vocals and Garth Hudson from the band on keyboards. The first album of this incarnation, Georgia Peach, was conceived as a tribute to Graham Parsons. Sneaky Pete left the band due to illness in 2005, leaving no direct lineage to any of the original 1969-1972 lineup. His final recordings do appear, however, on their 2007 album Disciples of Truth. In 2010, an English record label owner named Del Taylor attempted to reactivate the band using any and all previous members he could find. Bernie Ledon, Chris Etheridge, Al Perkins, and Gene Parsons all agreed if Chris Hillman would join. Hillman was not interested in the project and instead took steps to acquire the rights to the Flying Burrito Brothers so that he could retire the band once and for all. His efforts were in vain, however. As recently as 2011, a still further evolution of the band, led by Walter Egan from Burrito Deluxe, released an album under the name The Burritos called Sound as Ever. Beginning in 2012, that band began playing shows under the name The Burrito Brothers. Legacy: Parsons died on September 19, 1973. Clark died in 1993, Batten died in 2003, Cleanoe died in 2007, and Etheridge died in 2012. Hillman remained a successful singer-songwriter, having been part of the Souther Hillman Fury Band and McGuinn Clark Hillman, then going on to form the Desert Rose Band with Herb Pedersen. He continued to sing with Pedersen as Chris and Herb, releasing The Other Side in 2005. Gilber retired following heart surgery and moved to Palmdale, California, from where he continued to appear occasionally at local functions in and around the Los Angeles area. Belland continued to produce acts in the US and abroad, achieving hit records in both Australia and Norway, where he also performed as a solo act. Belland moved to Brenham, Texas, and has written hits for performers such as The Whites with Forever You, Mark Farner with Isn't It Amazing?, and the Bellamy Brothers with Cowboy Beat, Hard Way to Make an Easy Living, and Bound to Explode. His songs have been covered by many acts from Ricky Nelson to Garth Brooks. A Mexican restaurant in Gainesville, Florida, was named after the band. A chain of Mexican restaurants in New Zealand was named after the band. The role-playing game Kingdom of Loathing has a character named after the band. Timeline. Discography. Studio albums equals. The Flying Burrito Brothers. Sierra. The Burrito Brothers. Burrito Deluxe. The Burritos. Live albums equals, Last of the Red Hot Burritos, Live in Amsterdam, Bluegrass Special, Sin City, Flying Burrito Brothers 76, From Another Time, Close Encounters on the West Coast, Live from Tokyo, Hollywood Nights 1979-82, Cabin Fever, Live from Europe, Gram Parsons Archives Volume 1, Live at the Avalon Ballroom 1969, Authorized Bootleg, Fillmore East, NY, NY Late Show 1170. Compilation albums equals, Close Up the Hunky Tonks, Sleepless Nights, Farther Along, The Best of the Flying Burrito Brothers, Back to the Sweethearts of the Rodeo, Double Barrel, Best of the Flying Burrito Brothers, Out of the Blue, The Gilded Palace of Sin and Burrito Deluxe, Hot Burritos. The Flying Burrito Brothers Anthology 1969 Euro 1972, Best of Burrito Brothers, Sin City, The Very Best of the Flying Burrito Brothers. Singles. References